Starting off with how the markets are reacting to the EU's and the United States sanctions against Russia.
Yeah, general relief all round. In fact, Wall Street closed up significantly in trading on Monday, and we're seeing some similar optimism in the Asian markets today. The Nikkei yesterday had hit 6-week lows. It's up almost 1% in trading today. Just the Shanghai Composite touching slightly into the red there, but the Kospi and the Hang Seng in Hong Kong both trading in positive territory as well. Now, this latest measure of asset freezes and visa bans targeting those 21 Russian and Ukrainian individuals is what the EU and US are calling a second phase of sanctions against Russia. The first was this pullback from talks over economic issues and preparations for the G8 summit. But it's a potential third phase of sanctions that's now worrying investors. What might happen if the EU and US take further action, as Nicholas Rushworth now explains.
Should tension persist over Ukraine, there could be a phase 3 of sanctions by the EU, targeting a range of Russian business interests directly. However, for that, an agreement would have to be forged, as various countries seek to protect their interests. France, for example, has key defense contracts with Moscow for 2 aircraft carriers in a deal worth 1.2 billion euros. An arms embargo would end that. The German energy group RWE, meanwhile, is selling its oil and gas exploration and production division to the Russian investment group LetterOne. That deal is valued at 5 billion euros. Germany, Europe's economic giant, can take the hit. In terms of its dependence on Russian gas, recent good weather is helping.
Germany sends about 3% of its exports to Russia. That's not really that much. OK, 30% of our gas imports come from Russia. That might sound like a lot, but there are now many other countries which offer gas. And the gas reserves here in Germany are very well stocked because of the mild winter.
The UK too has significant business links with Russia. The City of London is the trading centre of choice for Russian oligarchs. There are 70 Russian companies listed on the London Stock Exchange. While certain EU countries would lose out, so too would Russia. The EU is far and away its main trading partner. Russia's economy has suffered during this Ukraine crisis. Investors have pulled out around 30 billion euros of capital, more than a tenth of economic output in the first quarter.
Let's go to China next, where house prices have grown at their slowest rate in Beijing and Shanghai in over a year. Now, the price of property in Beijing increased by just 0.2% in February, while in Shanghai it went up by just 0.4% compared to January. Now, across the 70 major cities, surveyed prices rose by 8% year on year. This follows rising concerns over tightening credit conditions in China and the number of unsold properties. Of course, the property sector, one of the most kind of touchy issues in China going forward. Interesting to see these prices slowing down.
OK, well, let's move on to the United States next. General Motors has announced another major recall of some of its cars to do with safety issues.
Yes, 1.5 million vehicles affected this time, mostly SUVs, over a whole range of issues, including issues with airbags and one involving the braking system. Now, this comes less than 2 months after the car maker was forced to recall another 1.6 smaller vehicles over an issue with faulty ignition switches in the engine. That was linked to 12 deaths in the United States. This latest recall not led to any injuries, the car maker says. Now, General Motors says these recalls are costing it around $300 million. CEO Mary Barra said the company was changing the way that it investigates defects.
In each case, we have pledged to cooperate fully while we work to make the recall itself as smooth as possible for our customers. These are serious developments that shouldn't surprise anyone. After all, something went wrong with our process in this instance, and terrible things happened.
Let's move on now with a quick look at some of the day's other business stories. And here in France, up to a third of flights have been cancelled due to a strike by air traffic controllers. The French Civil Aviation Authority asked airlines to reduce traffic through Paris's airports by 30% and by 20% through airports elsewhere in the country. It's part of a day of action called by unions here against President Hollande's plans to reduce social charges for employers. South Korea has awarded its first casino license to a foreign investor. Caesars Entertainment, along with Indonesia's Lippo Group, have been given permission for a new casino resort near the country's largest airport. Local laws prohibit South Koreans from gambling in casinos, but the government is hoping the venture will attract foreign gamblers. Lippo's shares soared 40% on that news in Indonesia. The Swedish truck maker Scania has rejected a €6.7 billion takeover bid from Volkswagen. A committee at the company says the offer doesn't reflect the long-term value of the company. Volkswagen already owns 63% of Scania and controls almost 90% of the voting rights.
Okay, finally now, a little bit early in the day for this here in Paris, but a whiskey, perhaps, a whiskey story maybe from Stephen.
I'm all right, actually.
You've had yours already with your tea.
Exactly. This is to do with the issue of Tennessee whiskey. A labelled Tennessee whiskey was only given under very strict conditions in the state.
Similar to sort of champagne and brie and
exactly,
that kind of thing.
It's an effort to try and create a particular brand. Okay. The recipe for Tennessee whiskey, I can tell you, is 51% corn filtered through maple charcoal and aged in new charred oak barrels. That, according to a law passed last year. Coincidentally, it also is the recipe for Jack Daniels, which is, of course, the best-known Tennessee whiskey. Accounts for some 90% of the drink made in the state. But the drinks giant Diageo, which makes one of Jack Daniels' rivals, George Dickey, says that it wants those rules relaxed. It's been hugely controversial, both sides getting involved in this debate over a very protected brand. The Tennessee state legislature getting involved there to discuss it in both the House and the Senate later this Tuesday.
Goodness, a very important issue brewing there in Tennessee. My attempts at a pun anyway. Thank you very much. Stephen Carroll, not impressed with the business news. We're going to move on to taking a check on all the top stories buzzing online in web news.
This video has been viewed some